Yes, this is the latest, and we've just heard this from court. The British nurse Lucy Letby has been found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder another 6. Let's get more on this from our correspondent. Holly Hudson will be joining us in a few moments' time. This, of course, has been a story that has been probably the last 20-odd days, and we'll get the full detail on this in a few moments, in court as the jury have been deliberating. There has been reporting restrictions on that, but we've now got those final verdicts. There were a number of them. This is live outside Manchester Crown Court right now, where those verdicts have just come in, that Lucy Letby has been found guilty of those 7 murders and more besides. A deeply disturbing story of a healthcare worker in charge of looking after children in the care of this woman, and this is the latest that has just come through, that breaking news that she's been found guilty. Those pictures are live from Manchester Crown Court. Let's get a full update and remind you a little more about how this story first came to our attention and the latest on what's been developing today with those verdicts. Holly Hudson, TalkTV correspondent, is with us in the studio. Holly.
Yes, Ian. Well, as you've just heard there, Lucy Letby, a 33-year-old former neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital, has been found guilty of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of others, 6 more babies. There were 22 counts that she was accused of in total on the indictment. 7 murders, as I say, and 15 attempted murders, and she has been found guilty of 7 murders and 6 other babies that she tried to kill. There were more counts than there were babies involved in this case, because the nurse was accused of trying to kill some of those babies multiple times, and the jury couldn't reach a verdict on some of those counts. We know that there will be a sentencing on Monday, but this has been one of the most anticipated criminal trials in decades, the scale of which we've not really seen before, simply because of the gravity of the claims against Lucy Letby. These are babies, that were some of the sickest, most premature in the country. The neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital cared for babies that were born weeks early, in some cases 10 weeks early. They weighed no more than a bag of sugar, some just weighing a few pounds, of course, entirely reliant on the skill, on the dedication of the trained medical staff to care for them and to keep them alive. And what Lucy Letby has been found guilty of today is sabotaging their care in some of the most horrific ways, some of the most chilling ways. Now, the methods that she used, and I will sort of stress here, warning that these are distressing details, certainly very harrowing to listen to. And the methods that she used involved injecting either insulin, air, or in some cases overfeeding babies with milk. Some of the babies suffered some kind of trauma. In one case, one baby suffered trauma akin to what the expert witnesses described as a road traffic collision. So incredibly difficult details to hear, and the parents of all of these children will have been in court throughout this 10-month trial, and we should obviously mention there that this trial has been going on. It's been a mammoth trial for a very long period of time across every single season, and the jury have been deliberating well into several weeks now. I think it's the 22nd day of deliberations, but there's of course a very good reason for that. As I mentioned, just the sheer seriousness of what Lucy Letby was accused of and has now been found guilty of.
This would have been, many court cases are disturbing for a jury, and a judge will inevitably acknowledge that in summing up and perhaps even throughout. Given the nature of this, it is so deeply disturbing. The jury sat through all of those months of hearing this. 10 months, you say. It's an incredibly, by any measure, that is a long court case. But as you say, legally it was complex because of the multiple charges. But then to have to deliberate on this, and of course you've got to get it right because that is the law of the land. But the backdrop of such harrowing circumstances that 12 men and women would have had to have sat through to reach this conclusion? I mean, it would have been incredibly difficult. These are clearly now the correct verdicts for what having listened to all the evidence, but that must have been some kind of toll on 12 people.
Yes, certainly so. And it's in fact 11 people now, Ian, because one juror was dismissed just a few weeks ago for good personal reasons. And that's something that we've seen throughout this trial, again, because it's been going on for such a long time. There have been many juror absences for sickness, for holiday, that have delayed the verdict being returned. And as you mentioned there is a wealth of evidence for these jurors to get through. There was 9 months of evidence at trial at Manchester Crown Court, including Lucy Letby's own cross-examination, which lasted 3 weeks in total. And as I mentioned, this case involved 17 babies, 22 counts to consider. And we're talking about a lot of very complex medical evidence here as well. You know, these expert witnesses, a lot of the consultants called in the trial, of course, discussing extremely difficult medical procedures. The jurors were in fact given iPads with sort of diagrams and demonstrations on for them to watch some of these procedures, and given a list of terminology as well. So you can sort of see and understand why it has taken so long and why it has taken them such a long time to consider these verdicts. But as I said, Lucy Letby has now been convicted, found guilty of the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 10 more, which makes her now one of the worst serial killers in the UK.
What do we know about Lucy Letby?
Lucy Letby, and I think this is one of the most shocking things that I've found in particular about this case, is a seemingly normal person. She came from a background in Hereford, a seemingly normal background with 2 loving parents. She grew up in rural Herefordshire. She went to school there. She picked her A-levels to basically follow the career of nursing. She was set on being a nurse from an early age, from a teenager, and her career at first Liverpool Women's Hospital and the Countess of Chester Hospital seemingly followed the same path as you would expect any normal sort of woman in her 20s and 30s to follow. She went to hula and salsa classes with other nurses. She had an active social life. She lived on what seems to be a very normal, very sort of rural residential street in Chester, very close to the hospital where she bought her own home. And from interviews with police investigating this case, I think this really sums it up. They say there's nothing in her character. Obviously, with serial killers such as this, you look to their character to try and find something, try and identify a motive, what might be behind these sorts of killings. But the police couldn't find anything in her background to suggest why or provide some sort of motivation. We did get a bit of an indication from the prosecution during the trial, who insinuated, or sort of, I suppose, gave some breadcrumbs to follow. They didn't exactly say that this was the reason or was the motivation behind Lucy Letby, but they did suggest that she killed to try and get the attention of a doctor that she had a crush on. Now, this was an unnamed registrar who hasn't been named for legal reasons to protect his identity, who came up quite a few times within the trial. And what the prosecution alleged was that Lucy Letby, in some cases, attacked these babies to crash bleep or call in this registrar to the neonatal unit to get his attention.